1945. This machine will be the last hope of a burning Reich. But in 1939, the bureaucracy built it for a different war. Berlin, the Alket assembly line. Technicians lower a short-barreled 75mm cannon onto a headless chassis. Clack, clack. The breech block slams shut. No turret, no rotation. Just a low-profile steel box rolling out of the factory gates. The conveyor belts would not stop until the final surrender. Why does the infantry need its own armor? Because towed artillery is too slow. It gets stuck in mud while motorized columns race forward. The infantry needed a mobile sledgehammer, a gun that could keep up and blast bunkers at point-blank range. The result was the Sturmgeschütz III, the StuG. Production numbers tell the story of the war: 10,000 units. That is more than the combined strength of every French tank division in 1940. The racks inside held high-explosive shells and smoke rounds. The gun velocity was low. The armor was thin. It was a support weapon, not a duelist. German High Command issued a specific directive regarding its use. Under no circumstances was this vehicle to be deployed as a tank destroyer. While the assembly lines geared up for assault guns, the Panzer divisions relied on the Panzer III. It was the backbone. Beside it ran the Panzer IV. These were not the famous heavy monsters of later propaganda. They were workhorses, reliable, lethal in skilled hands. They allowed the Wehrmacht to execute the blitzkrieg with surgical precision. But surgery does not win a war of attrition. The industrial gap was catastrophic. The Allies eventually outproduced Germany 14-1. Put simply, for every German tank on the field, the enemy fielded 14. It is the tactical equivalent of pitting a single regiment against a full division. Germany brought a precision instrument to a sledgehammer fight. The steel was better, the optics were superior, but the math was impossible. The production deficit hit 1,400% against a 14-1 numerical crush. The Reich found salvation in a machine that shouldn't have worked. Which vehicle inflicted the highest casualties of the war? Not the Tiger, the assault gun. The Wehrmacht's most lethal killer was not technically a tank. It was a bureaucratic anomaly. On the blueprints, it looks incomplete. A low silhouette, no rotating turret, just a gun fixed directly to the chassis. The propaganda reels sold the world on the invincible Tiger and the Panther. The reality was the StuG. Official classification: assault gun. It couldn't fire while moving. Panzer divisions initially rejected it as a useless compromise. But this mechanical misfit destroyed more Allied armor than any other vehicle in the conflict. Effective, cheap, deadly. History simply forgot it. Operation Barbarossa exposed a fatal miscalculation. The Wehrmacht advanced, expecting light resistance. Instead, they hit a wall. The Soviet T-34 and KV-1 were immune to standard German fire. Shells simply bounced off. The panic traveled from the front lines to the industrial planners in Berlin. Why the urgency? Because the enemy possessed superior armor, and they deployed it in waves that defied logic. The standard short-barreled howitzers became useless liabilities. The German military machine faced a crisis of obsolescence. The response was an industrial emergency. The StuG short gun was scrapped. Engineers mounted the long-barreled 75mm L-43. The barrel length grew by 50%. Velocity spiked. The high-explosive support role vanished, replaced by pure kinetic energy. The machine evolved from infantry support to tank hunter. The new round didn't bounce. It punched straight through the Soviet steel. The physics were solved. But the Reich faced a deadlier problem: bankruptcy. How do you build an armored force when the treasury is empty? You cut the turret. You save 30,000 marks in a single stroke. Engineers took the standard Panzer III chassis. The tooling was ready. The parts were interchangeable. They stripped the complex rotation mechanism and welded a fixed steel box onto the hull. Then the accountants looked at the numbers. A Panzer IV cost 100,000 Reichsmarks. A Tiger, the propaganda icon, burned through a staggering 300,000. The StuG cost 70,000. For the price of one heavy tank, the Wehrmacht could put 4 assault guns into the field. One Tiger defends a crossroads. 4 StuGs defend a sector. Economy dictated the shape. The vehicle stood lower than a man's shoulder. In the high summer grass of the east, the low silhouette simply disappeared. Soviet gunners scanned the horizon. They saw only empty steppe. No turret, no shadow. Cheap did not mean weak. The discount chassis carried the exact same high-velocity gun as the tanks it replaced. The accountants in Berlin demanded efficiency. The propaganda ministry demanded monsters. They wanted a 300,000-mark symbol of invincibility to dominate the newsreels. Take the Panther. On blueprints, it was a masterpiece of balance, firepower, protection, mobility. In reality, it was a liability. Transmissions shattered. Engines burst into flames on the train ramps. Early models destroyed themselves without ever seeing an enemy. By the time the reliable Model G arrived in 1944, the strategic window had closed. Hitler bet everything on the miracle weapon. The industry produced just 1,300 Tigers. The massive King Tiger saw a total production run of only 489 units. 489 tanks. The Soviet factories produced that many T-34s in less than a week. Berlin celebrated 6,000 Panthers. The Allies answered with a flood of steel. 50,000 Shermans, 84,000 T-34s. Quality is irrelevant when you are outnumbered 14-1. The failure of the complex Panther forced engineers to upgrade the workhorse. The StuG already had the gun, a high-velocity 75mm cannon capable of cracking Allied frontal armor. But it also had the eyes. Superior optics allowed crews to spot and kill targets at ranges where the Panzer IV was blind. Without a heavy turret, the chassis was agile. The transmission did not shatter under excess weight. While Tigers broke down on the roadside, the StuG maintained the highest operational availability of any German tracked vehicle. But the threats changed. Infantry began carrying portable death, Soviet anti-tank rifles, the American bazooka, the British PIAT. The German answer was crude but effective. Schürzen. Thin steel skirts hung loosely along the sides of the hull. A dull clang echoed inside the cabin when a round hit. The mechanics were simple physics. A Soviet bullet or a shaped charge warhead would punch through the thin outer skirt easily, but the impact destabilized the projectile. It began to tumble wildly in the empty air gap between the skirt and the tank. By the time the round struck the main armor, it had lost the kinetic focus required to penetrate. Steel plates could shatter a warhead, but the lethality of the machine came from the men inside, who pulled the trigger, not a tanker. The Wehrmacht classified the vehicle as a mobile gun, so the crews came from artillery schools. This bureaucratic technicality changed everything. Panzer cadets learned speed, aggression, and shock tactics. Artillerymen learned geometry, ballistics, and patience. A tank commander charges, an artilleryman calculates. This difference in doctrine turned the machine into the deadliest asset on the battlefield. They applied this cold math everywhere, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the burning sands of North Africa and the collapsing fronts of Western Europe. The result was a disproportionate slaughter of Allied armor. Success brought privilege. StuG battalions gained elite status. While infantry divisions scavenged for supplies, these gunners received priority logistics. The Tiger had the propaganda posters. The Panther had the sleek profile. But the ugly, turretless assault gun did the killing. The infantry knew the difference. 30,000. That is the number of Soviet tanks destroyed by a vehicle that technically wasn't a tank at all. Near Leningrad in 1943, artillery drill turned into bloody mathematics. The sheer scale of the slaughter defies logic. 30,000 kills exceeds the entire armored fleet the Soviet Union possessed on the first day of the war. It is more than the Tiger or Panther ever achieved. The cheap, turretless chassis became the deadliest asset of the Wehrmacht. Look at the map of the Leningrad front. One StuG battalion, 41 guns hidden in the tree line. The Red Army attacked with heavy armor. The snow turned black from the soot of burning diesel. Shells from the long 75mm cannons punched through T-34 hulls before the Russians could spot the muzzle flashes. When the smoke cleared, 221 Soviet wrecks lay on the ice. The German battalion lost 13 machines. This was not a battle, it was an execution. The lethality came from the operators, not just the steel. Kurt Nispel, the most successful tank ace in history, did not build his reputation in a heavy tank. He learned his trade in the cramped hull of an assault gun. He remains the top scorer of the war. 168 confirmed kills, but even aces could not stop the avalanche. 30,000 destroyed enemy tanks meant nothing when the factories behind them lay in ruins. The initiative was gone. On the frozen steppes of the Eastern Front and in the hedgerows of Normandy, the Wehrmacht shifted to survival mode. Expensive tanks evaporated. Replacing them required resources Germany no longer possessed. The solution was industrial improvisation. Allied bombers turned assembly lines into twisted metal. Supply chains snapped. Engineers had to build with what was left. They took the chassis of the Panzer IV. They welded the fixed superstructure on top. The result was the StuG IV, a hybrid born of desperation. Then came the StuG 42. Engineers mounted a massive 105mm howitzer in the hull. It was a dark historical irony. The vehicle returned to its original classification as an infantry support weapon. But this time, it wasn't clearing the way for a blitzkrieg. It was firing high-explosive shells to cover a chaotic retreat. This was the backbone of the final defense: cheap, low profile, deadly. While the propaganda machine promised miracle weapons, these hybrids held the line. Germany had finally mastered the economics of war, but the clock had run out. History often focuses on the heavy cats like the Tiger, but the numbers tell a different story. The StuG series finished the war as the single most mass-produced armored fighting vehicle of the Third Reich.